Welcome to MindShifters Radio. My name is Dr. Michael Ryce, and my wife Jeanie, as of course everybody knows, is still out in the desert, so she's able to get an internet connection, so she is operating the control panel for our show, but I'm actually driving into the big city of Pahrump, Nevada, to be able to get where we have a telephone signal. Jeanie doesn't have one, so that's why you're not hearing her voice. And you are hearing mine. And today is Aramaic Friday. We have this awesome opportunity, especially with today being what the world calls Good Friday. And, of course, from the focus of most of the world, it's kind of strange to be hearing it called Good Friday until you understand what it's really about. And we have Aramaic scholar Dale Allen Hoffman, whose website is www.daleallenhoffman.com, and he's with us to share with us these principles of the ancient Aramaic and the understanding of the original intention and the original teachings as they came forward from the Aramaic. Our main focus out of the Aramaic throughout the year is the first century Aramaic idea of forgiveness, the very opposite of what our culture teaches, and it is an action that we invite everyone to engage in. We invite everyone to participate in. The last couple of days we've had some awesome shows, and it's interesting how the energy of things comes together, in new ways when it's time. And last week we met with two people here in, actually three people in Las Vegas who are interested in support in bringing the forgiveness process into the military community, the former military community, which is suffering from about 200 suicides a day throughout America of military vets returning from the Middle East, a number that isn't quoted very often. It's kept kind of hidden away. And then over just the last couple of days, we've had, if you check out the show the day before yesterday, we got a call from Brad who said, as a vet, and has been doing this work for a year, he's willing to step into his power to bring this into the veterans community. And he's begun with Combat Vets to bring forgiveness forward. And then on yesterday's show, if you want to give a listen to that, Michelle stepped up to the plate, and Michelle works with former vets as a therapist, and a program with vets in duress, a program with, my throat's a little froggy yet this morning, it's early out here, working with vets who are in legal situations and bringing programs to these women and men to support them in healing and dealing with the legal challenges that they've gotten themselves into. So both of those folks have stepped forward, and there's just this flurry of activity in that direction. So it is certainly an awesome opportunity to be doing that, to be bringing forward these ancient Aramaic ideas. And the reason why I bring that up today, being Good Friday, and the fact that it's Aramaic Friday, and we'll welcome Dale in just a minute, is that the game of the world oftentimes around this time of year is the suffering. I know that I've sat in churches and watched. I remember several years ago going into a church, and they actually brought a wooden cross, and they brought a dummy, a body in front of everybody, the suffering and the pain, nailed these nails into this cross. And the focus on suffering out of the ancient teachings, as though suffering was going to get you somewhere, is just really, when you really think about it, pretty bizarre. If you've been brought up in it and brainwashed, and this seems very logical, but when you step back as the observer, it gets to be pretty bizarre. In fact, if you'd like to listen, there are the first two chapters of a new book I've been working on. It's actually been on the shelf for a couple of years now, but The End of Suffering, Resurrecting the Original Aramaic Yeshua the Christ. And there are two chapters which have been read. They're audio files, so if you look in the audio file section, you'll see those. We actually got an email, or pardon me, a Facebook post from a gentleman in South America who had been having back pains for over 10 years, to the point where he was doing 10 Oxycontin, I believe it was Oxycontin, I might be wrong, Jeanie might send me a text and correct me on that, a day, 40 milligrams, 10 a day for 10 years. And he listened to the first chapter of that book, and he stopped cold turkey, and his back pain was disappeared that fast. His suffering disappeared, and his addiction to these painkillers disappeared. The real focus of the work is the disappearance of suffering, not the focus and the wonderful and how great it is to suffer, but that if one engages in their human lives and one engages in the actual original Aramaic teachings of Yeshua, that's the end of suffering. It's done. It's time for us to get over it. It's time to get finished with this suffering game and wake up. And if you go back 2,000 years ago, that's what Yeshua was teaching people to do. The Greeks came along, and because if you keep people in their pain and their suffering, they make really great slaves. Thus, this whole teaching has grown up around suffering and pain and blood and trauma. And we're here to say that's a fraud. We're here to say the idea is there is enough suffering in the world. You look at, how do we get to, strong young men and young women, bright young men and young women are killing themselves at a rate of 200 a day in this country. Talk about suffering. What has been inflicted upon them that there's a level of suffering where 200 healthy young men and women, and when I say healthy, I mean 4, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago when they were recruited to go over there and kill people, they were healthy people. Why are they killing themselves at 200 a day? Because of suffering. And it's time to put an end to it, and that's what we're here to support. So, Dale, I'm going to just turn the show over to you and welcome you. We are honored and blessed that you're here with us, and see what your thoughts are in that regard.
Good Friday. How are you?
I'm blessed and highly favored. How about you?
I'm doing absolutely phenomenal. I just had a really sort of intensive week-long trip through I was about to say the Middle East, but the Midwest. It was it was great. I brought Lucinda with me, our oldest, and it's amazing that I got home and today went to my little coffee shop to sit in the corner in my little cocoon and get back to the book again, and it just flooded right out as if it was waiting. And I find it very interesting that the phrase that I was looking at, and one of the phrases I was kind of doing a little midrash or interpretation around in the book was from Matthew 6, where Yeshua said, of course, lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, etc. It was sort of right after, actually very soon after, he gave us what's called today the Lord's Prayer or the Our Father. And I started thinking back on how it was when I was 7 years old. It was that phrase when I was in a it wasn't Sunday school actually, it was a vacation Bible school class during the summer of, what would that be, 79. And I remember having this experience of everybody in the room talking about what they felt it meant. And it was funny because for years I couldn't remember what the phrase was, and then it popped into my head that it was the moth and rust destroy one, and the treasures in heaven. And I started looking like a little bit deeper even into that, and remembered that when I was 14 years old, that was the first phrase that I sat down with a typewriter, actually, my sister's electric typewriter when I was 14, and I started riffing on the words of Jesus, like writing down his phrases from a King James Bible and then writing my own nuances of that. And it's interesting because I found myself in front of that phrase today, and there's some phrases in there that are so incredibly rich. It's funny how even since I was a kid, I've sort of only been halfway interested in, most of the time at least, I've only ever seemed to be halfway interested in what anybody said about him. I was always very interested in what words were attributed to Jesus, and I found it fascinating that as I'm starting to look through that, moth and rust destroy treasures in heaven, that it was very clear that I hadn't really sort of picked it apart before. And he's talking about the treasures, and it was funny to me that I hadn't noticed before that the word treasures was a masculine gendered word. And funny thing what that would mean, actually, and it's something I got when I was a kid. It was the word simta. Simta is what it sounds like. And, of course, a feminine-gendered word, the Aramaic ear that was hearing it would have understood he was not talking about a physical thing, as in masculine, but he was talking about a state of being, and that word treasure was actually, in fact, a state of being. And just a few lines later in Matthew, we come to that great phrase, if your eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye should be pure, your whole body will be full of light. And that's amazing because, first of all, that word eye, of course what that means would be not just your physical eye, but your perception. And one of the times I remember that popping for me is in that Kabbalist enlightenment. In that, I remember it being there, sort of in the middle. That if your perception be pure, your body will be full of light. That word's Enoch in Aramaic, which is interesting, Enoch. And I started digging a little bit deeper into it, and I came right here with the text, and I'm like, oh my God, the word for pure, which was something that was a big subject last week, is the sound Peshitta. And Peshitta is also one of the other Aramaic texts besides the Kabbalist manuscript is called the Peshitta. And what Peshitta means is pure or unadulterated. It means something in its original state that hasn't been disturbed. And of course, the word body here is pagrak, which would mean the physical, an interesting thing, because what that means, pagrak or pagra, means physical body, as opposed to the energy body, which Yeshua would call the haikla. He'd say the physical body will be full of light. And I was very intrigued because what he's saying is that which is in fact not real, as in the physical body, which one would call masculine or apparently physical. What he's saying is that when you take your attention, of course, off of the physicality of the world, of the treasures of the world and physical manifest things, and you take your attention off of that back to the spiritual, back to the essence, back to the feminine, back to the realization and the states of experience, the direct experience and being, that even something that appears to be so real, such as your body, begins to fill with light. And of course, in the filling of light, you realize that in fact that body does not exist. And that's the realization that the stuff that we focused on, we're trying to get all the toys we can in this physical life, in fact is nothing but a game, because the only thing that is real is the actual experience. The stuff is just stuff, and you can't obviously take it with you. And I've had so many just today, and it ties right in with Good Friday in that, it's not about the suffering, it's about the realization that we are suffering and that there's a way through that suffering. And then when we can actually bring light into the body through still point breathing, through conscious breath work, meditation, the actual forgiveness process, then we come into the realization that the body is a natural reflection or outpicturing of our consciousness. So if our body is full of sickness, that means our consciousness or what we think or what we feel is full of sickness. And it's just, I've had so many realizations just in the last couple of hours. It's kind of cool to be doing it, coming on the radio show, because it's a great, I've loved doing the show. And I've been getting so much feedback from people that have been downloading them saying, oh my God, they're like, you're talking about stuff on there that you don't talk about anywhere else, which is what's so great, because it's a continuing conversation. It's not me rolling into a town on the other side of the United States of America and sort of having to start back at square one. So it's just been a great experience.
Awesome. And of course, we're working to supply people, to provide people with the tools to have that experience. It's not talking about somebody who 2,000 years ago had the experience. Isn't that nice? But how do you have the experience? How do you, as an individual, you go back to Yeshua and we hear him saying, take up your cross and follow me. And I like to note to people, you notice he doesn't say take up my cross and follow me. A lot of people want to focus on his suffering. What he's saying is, I live in relationship to love. I choose to live as the active presence of love. You've got to follow me. If you're actually going to do what I say to do, you're going to follow me. You are going to live as love. And to do that, you're going to have to take up your cross. You're going to have to deal with whatever your private hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, fear, and suffering is, and I'm going to show you how to forgive it. I'm going to show you how to remove that. And notice that you're blaming everybody else in your world for it. Notice when you open your mouth, you say, they made me mad, they hurt me. He really made me sad. He really disturbed me. That situation really upset me. And all of that conversation is about denial and dissociation, which leaves people believing that everybody else is the problem in their lives, and all they need to do is forgive them. And we say, never forgive anybody. If you listen to Yeshua, he says, you must forgive from your heart the wrongs of your brother. In other words, when you go into denial and dissociation, your mind is going to make up a whole story about everybody else cause of your pain. What's in your heart is where your pain is, and you must remove from your heart that which you put into your brain's image of everybody else and are blaming everybody else for. And so to take up your cross, to me, this being Good Friday, is a time for people to realize that whatever it is they've been blaming others for is the content of their own minds, and they must take that up and live in the space of the removal of that on a continuous, ongoing basis. And it's not a one-time event. Sometimes, when you go back to Yeshua, where the disciples say, well, how many times should we forgive? Is 7 enough? And Yeshua's reply is 77 times 70, an infinite number of times until you're finished with it. You're going to pick up your cross again and again and again. And as you apply the tool of forgiveness, then you get to remove that suffering. You get to remove that pain. It isn't about worshiping the pain and the suffering, which is what the Greeks have done in order to keep us locked into suffering. It's like, it's time for it to end. It's time for us to just absolutely, truly, totally live as human beings. Follow in his footsteps, which is to do that. And you'll notice that even in the midst of this terror and trauma of just the infliction of such pain, this is kind of which is kind of strange, the celebration of the pain inflicted, what does Yeshua do? He stays connected to love. He goes into, the Garden of Gethsemane. He takes his support team with him. Here are 3 guys that he has been teaching for 3 years full time to live as the active space of love. He walks into the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, Father, can this cup pass from me? I'm not sure I'm ready for this. He taps into his support team, and he realizes their energy's gone. They've gone blotto. He goes out, and he says, can't you guys stay awake for an hour? They haven't handled their suffering. So in the face of needing to support him in the work he was to do that day, they go blotto. They go unconscious. They just go out. They can't hold the space for that. And, they've been working with him 3 years full time. This is not an overnight success story. This is a process for each of us to be able to develop the skills of doing what we were asked to do, and that was our own work. So you'll notice that Yeshua goes back into the garden again. Now, from a naturopathic point of view, the medicine that I'm trained in, treating this so-called body, the energy system, as an energy system rather than a physical thing, you know that when an energy goes into it, it's going to have to come back out. If one were going to detox generations and generations of pain and trauma and suffering, what do you suppose that might look like? Well, we're told in that story that he sweat blood, and I suspect that to do that emergency process to get ready to be killed and resurrect, I would suspect from a physician's point of view that would literally look like the sweating of blood, which we're told he did. And then he comes out of the garden. Now we've got a perfect setup for the world myth. The world myth is there's a good guy and there's a bad guy, and the good guy kills the bad guy, becomes the hero. And in that story, if you look at Peter, he wants to be the hero. They're on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter says, how many swords should we bring, Master? And Yeshua says, just bring one. And, when you think about it, they're expecting and hoping for a physical king in a physical realm. And as you say, Dale, that's not the idea. It's more about the treasures in another dimension. But they're thinking of a physical king, and they're thinking, wow, how cool is this going to be? All this guy's going to need is one sword, and he's going to wipe out those oppressors, that whole Roman army. Boy, I can't wait to see that battle. Yeshua comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane, and now we've got the setup for the the world myth, the good guy, the bad guy story. There's Yeshua, the good guy. There's the bad guy, the high priest servant, and we've got the guy with the sword who's going to be the hero. And the high priest servant comes to take Yeshua, and Peter's going to protect him. And he goes in with his sword and, aims at the high priest servant's head. Fortunately, he just gets an ear. And I could imagine that Yeshua gave him the look at that moment because that wasn't Yeshua's thing. That wasn't what Yeshua was there to do. He turns to Peter, and he tells Peter why he allowed him to bring a sword. He says, Peter, and if only we could hear this message in the world today. He says, Peter, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. The world hasn't heard that message yet. But he allowed Peter to bring a sword to give him a message. Peter, if you use weapons, you will create a world filled with weapons. The tool you use to produce a result will always produce a result just like the tool. And then here's Yeshua with the archenemy, the good guy, bad guy story, the world myth, and the archenemy is injured. He's had his ear cut off. Now, does Yeshua dress him down like every good rage-filled person would and say, now get out of here before we give you more? No. He actually demonstrates how to function as a human being. What does he do? Even though he knows this guy's going to have him shred to bits, he reaches forward and heals him. He functions as a human being, as the active presence of love. Now, I've had people who say to me, well, Michael, that's an interesting way to look at it, but did you notice that doing that got him dead? And I say, yes, I noticed that doing that got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? That's what he really came to teach us. If you live as the active presence of love, if you're willing to take up your cross, your own rage, guilt, grief, fear, and pain, and forgive it, then you too live as the active presence of love. And we create a whole different world out of that. How do you live as the active presence of love? Well, you're going to have to sweat some blood. You're going to have to remove everything in you that is unlike that. What are your thoughts, Dale?
Yeah, there's actually a word, hematidrosis, I believe, is the word of splitting when someone actually sweats blood. And there's a few in American history. I can't remember which the boat was. There's a few, like maybe a couple dozen references just within U.S. history over the last couple of hundred years. Like there was one boat that was going down, and some of the people on the boat were actually sweating blood, facing their own death. And it's funny that, I don't know if funny is the word. I use that word because I find it very peculiar that, as a matter of fact, today in the Middle East, in the Near East, there's going to be people literally carrying crosses through the town and bawling their eyes out because of some person that they think is outside of themselves, not understanding that it's got nothing to do with his cross. It's got nothing to do with that cross, except as an example of ourselves to come into that conscious presence and do the work ourselves. It's just an amazing. Even though through all of his teachings, he was constantly saying, it's not about me, it's about you doing your work. Even in the bad translations, it still says that, and somehow we're still coming back to that same thing. That's exactly what he was saying when he said, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth. He was saying that word earth, it's the manifestation, it's the physicality. In other words, don't point to me as a physical human being person, that somehow what I do in my lifetime somehow absolves you from, remember, we're not separate here. This is not something that you're going to find outside of you like in Jesus. This is something about us finding it on that direct experiential level. And, of course, the kingdom is not something that exists simply after our body drops. That's the brownie points, Do good here in this life, because after you die, in that kingdom of heaven, as we think of it today, as so many think of it today, that somehow you're going to get your brownie points back, and you're going to get a there, good pat on the back, and then you're going to be ushered to the front of the line or something ridiculous like that. But he's saying literally right here, right now, step into the presence, be conscious of that, and do whatever it is you need to do now, and understand that it's not something outside of you. And when we point to Jesus, the man, we're doing the very thing he absolutely cautioned us not to do, which is to look outside for the source of our being, for the source of our own realization, for the source of our own awakening. It's exactly what that is. Am I still on the line?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. There's just silence. Hello, Tim.
There was silence because I think we lost Michael, but
okay.
Silence for me because I was just letting it sink in.
It's funny because this time last week I was the one driving, so
yeah,
it's him.
I am literally still buzzing from your visit here Tuesday night.
Beautiful. I actually am too, and I've been getting a lot of messages from people. It was really something to remember. And speaking of, Michael talking about Gethsemane and, the front line not being able to hold the space, the support team, and it was so amazing I see it all the time, but it was so profoundly obvious that night that even though I had sort of gave the disclaimer right off saying, don't try to understand what I'm saying, let go and just be in the experience with me, of course, human nature, people did hold on in the beginning, and they were just looking at confused and baffled and panicked, and I love that because it started cracking a little more and cracking a little more and cracking a little more. We went to the break and came back, and people had finally let go, and then that second half there was so transcendent because there was enough people empty in the room that were able to be home in emptiness, that were able to be present with that outside of whatever their thoughts and feelings were. They were realizing that it's not anti-intuitive. In fact, it's anti-conditioning. It's those ideologies having to crack in order to get through to what things really mean.
Yeah, it was
absolutely
very special. And did you get my message that the audio is available?
Yeah, I replied to that sometime yesterday. We drove 13 and a half hours straight home, Lucinda and I, so we did make it back a couple nights ago. It was an intensive drive, but we made it. And I did get that, yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing the energy and letting us record it so it can be a nice reminder to people. I put it on my blog and I said, you're not going to get the experience of being there, but you can get a hint of it by listening to this recording. And for some who were there, they might be able to resonate some of the same feelings. It was just a wonderful time.
And that, again, is what we're talking about even with this, is that it's in that direct experience. That doesn't mean throw the books down. That doesn't mean, don't listen to recordings or something secondhand. But what it does mean is that, the key is in the actual direct experience, in the presence, such as somebody can go to Michael's Why Again workshop and understand every single word that he says from a psychological standpoint, but if they're not actually doing the process in the second half of the workshop of actually doing the forgiveness process, understanding the process means absolutely nothing. I mentioned somehow it came out of my mouth the other day that it's not about understanding, it's about standing under. It's about creating or letting that foundation birth forth from that place of presence, from a place of truth with a capital T, rather than from our own ideologies, belief systems, religious programming, or whatever it may be. It's about actually living it and being in the process.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Tim, I don't know if you happen to be on the switchboard.
I am on the switchboard. Jeanie has called in through Claudia's phone, and she's there. She has unmuted herself. And currently we don't have anybody else with a hand up, but we do have quite a few callers online.
Oh, okay, cool. Well,
so if anybody has a question for Dale, just hit 1 and we'll know, and you're next in queue.
And other than that, Dale, any other input regarding the whole Easter event from the Aramaic perspective, the whole idea of resurrection and moving beyond that state of suffering?
I've read actually several sort of scholarly articles in the last few days that I always find interesting, because there's people trying to blast down any pagan connection, blast down Ishtar, and all these different sort of mythic stories that came into it. Of course, the bunnies and the fertility festival, etc. It's a funny thing because I think out of about 6 articles I read from a scholarly standpoint, which I keep my eyes open to, but I definitely don't put all my eggs in that basket. Every single one had some sort of slant that it was trying to get to. None of them were sort of open. They just all felt like, here's the ideology I have, and I want to convince you of it. And I thought it very interesting because at the same time, I picked up in Barnes & Noble a couple days ago, I picked up the current issue of Skeptic magazine, and right on the cover it says, "Did Jesus exist?" or "Did Jesus actually exist?" Something along those lines. And it was amazing because I read the whole article actually finally this morning. I'd had it for a few days, and it was a very interesting, fairly open discussion about like a lot the historicity of him as a person, etc. And I just find it very interesting that the ones that were being told, like the hard-nosed scholars, the ones that were supposed to believe because they have all of this information that maybe we don't know and we haven't studied, when you actually, and I don't mean this about all scholars, not at all, and scholar is kind of a very fluid word. It means different things to different people. But the ones that, were basically being programmed, like these are the ones we're supposed to believe, unfortunately, it's like in a lot of cases it's not, because all we're getting is that person's ideology in a lot of cases, and whatever their BS is, of course their belief system, whatever that is, in this moment in time, rather than some people who can just go and lay it all out there and just say, look, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. And in terms of Easter and resurrection, it's again, I go back to that amazing thing of when we're looking at Jesus, there's actually people that I've met that says that if Jesus hadn't resurrected his body, then it wouldn't matter. Nothing in that message would matter. And I think, well, wow, what an interesting way of looking at that. Again, it's exactly what he said not to do. It's focusing on a treasure on earth, as in a physical man resurrecting his physical body. It's exactly what he said when he was saying, go back into the center, go back into your own intimate, direct experience within yourself and resurrect that body. Bring light to that pagra. Bring the light to that body. And he even said it right after he was talking about the treasures in heaven and the treasures on earth, and we still are doing the same thing. We're looking at his physical body, so amazed that he was able to do that when right after he talked about those treasures on earth and the treasures in heaven, he was saying, this is about bringing light into your body. This is about you being Pashita, being pure, being Beitola or Beitolta, to be pure in your being, to be able to bring your light into this world without the hindrance or the blockages or the veils or the masks of the bushel baskets, of all of those things that we've laid on top. And, of course, pointing at him has to be a bushel basket because we're pointing at something outside of ourselves for the source of our own consciousness, the source of our own life or awakening. And that's the exact opposite of what he told us to do. He cautioned us not to look outside, but to, in fact, look within. And, of course, we forget that. And it's so important that people understand that at any point in time, if you're pointing outside to somehow think that something outside of you can be added on that'll somehow make you more of the light that you are in truth, you're believing in a bushel basket that somehow you can put that bushel on top of that light and that new piece of information is somehow going to be it. It's not about information. It's about transformation. It's not about understanding what you say in the first half of Why Again, or what I say in one of my talks. It's about being willing to actually put the pen to the paper and be in the experience, to be able to actually do that forgiveness and do our own work. And, man, if we could, it's the thing that drives me, is letting people know it's not about the words. It's not about the information. It's not about the psychology Michael was telling you about. It's about you living the process and doing it, actually stepping in the footsteps and being in that.
And I think, Dale, that there's another part to, and it's a really important part to understand. Beyond the forgetting about looking within, there is terror at looking within. We recognize that it's probably been almost 2,000 years since the Greeks took over and made it an external teaching, which means for every person who's going to do their work, there is 2,000 years of genetics with such insanity. When you look historically at what's been done, you look at, 285 million people murdered on planet Earth in the last 75 years. You look at 200 vets killing themselves every day today in America. You look at the Dark Ages and what was done there. You look at the beheadings. You look at the slaughter. You look at the insanity that's happened, the wars down through the ages. And you realize that everyone on the planet is impacted by all of that energetically. And those energetic patterns are passed from generation to generation. And if I'm one who finally decides to stick my head up out of that soup and say, I'm going to look within, and I realize this, especially when we're asking people to step into doing the forgiveness process. The forgiveness process collapses the outer eye and gives people the opportunity and the direction to really be able to look within. And I realize that what we're asking people to do is to really take on and deal with, forgive, look at some of the worst atrocities that have ever happened that have been passed down and are held within each one of us. So I realize that when you say to somebody, okay, are you ready to start doing worksheets, and you're going to do 5 a day for the next 10 years? We heard Julie on the show the other day, and Julie has been doing worksheets for 25 years. And her worksheets number in the thousands upon thousands. And she called into the show the other day and shared with us how the day before she had done 26 worksheets. What we're asking people to do is to look into a bucket of some of the worst slop that has ever happened on the planet. And until one starts to develop the skills and the strengths, which to me, this is one of the things that the example of Yeshua gives us, the strength to be able to look there. Most people just want to check out. Most people just want to go unconscious. Most people, if that stuff starts to move, just want a fifth of scotch or a shot of cocaine or give me my vitamin V Valium. They just want to drug themselves. Let me go eat sugar. Let me drink my coffee. Let me have my junk food. Let me smoke a cigarette. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to deal with this. And so I think that really recognizing that what we're inviting people into takes a huge amount of courage to say, all right, I'm going to start cracking open the veil of my temple, and I'm going to start to look at what's happened in my generations and what I am unconsciously carrying around inside of me. There's an interesting video on our website. You can just go to the search bar on whyagain.org and just type in the word ghost. There's a video there, The Ghost in Our Genes. Watch that. And they're tracing back over hundreds of years, looking at records where things have happened to people in historical records where they've got, documentation, and watching the impact genetically 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 generations later, and seeing how that has impacted. The genetic research world is starting to realize what the Aramaic was teaching 2,000 years ago. The sins of the fathers are passed to 3 and 4 generations, that these energetic patterns, and of course that word sin in Aramaic simply meaning off the mark, the energetic patterns, the hates, the fears, the griefs, the rages, the pains of the generations are cumulative until somebody comes along with the removal tool. And the removal tool was disappeared almost 2,000 years ago, so anybody who steps in and starts to look in there, it's, for most people, literally a house of horrors. And the courage to support and be supported the courage to go in and begin to develop the skills of going inside yourself and decoding and removing what never belonged, recognizing that as long as we can't decode it, then somebody with the decoder is going to show up in our lives because we're energetic beings and we're always sending a message out to draw that to us. You know, it's huge when you recognize what we're asking people to do. And then to gently slip them in doing it is a whole other story.
And it doesn't feel so good a lot of times. I remember I didn't get so deep in that first Why Again workshop. I did a little, and I kind of experimented with the worksheet a little over the next few months. But when I got to Heartland, and I really dug in, and I did at least 5 worksheets a day, it was something that I actually can very easily see that if I was doing it on my own, feeling that I was on my own, I probably very likely, you know, even with my sort of motivation, I may very likely have just laid it down and walked away and said, well, I'll deal with that later. And that's what makes Heartland or intensives something beyond one single day. It's what makes that so important is because, you know, when it hits the fan, you're able to have someone that's there and actually be in that presence for you. And it's something that, it's something that I said it over and over again. I'm so thankful and I'm so grateful that I started with that. I started, you know, intensively right in the middle of it, basically, is what I tell people is I dove in head first. And it's something that even today I'm still sort of processing and coming into, like, understanding and realization of things that I was just starting to understand at Heartland in 95 the first time. So it doesn't stop. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. I don't mean that as a threat so much as, to me, that's why the process is so great, is because it works. And it always works, but it only always works if you're working it, if you're actually doing it.
For sure. And, you know, I will do a workshop series. We'll do a week-long series, of course, starting out with why is this happening to me again, and maybe there'll be 75 people in the room. And by the end of the week, everybody's got a pretty good comprehension of it. And then I'll offer that I'll be really delighted, you know, 75 people in the room. If I come back here next year and there are 5 of you actually still doing the work, I'll be really delighted. I'll consider that as being very successful. Because people start out and go, Rod, this is so cool, man, I'm going to do this. And then they have to actually get some of it on them. They have to actually open that veil of their own temples. When Yeshua talked about the veil of the temple must be rent in twain, he wasn't talking about a purple curtain in a church. That's part of the celebration today. Well, what's this veil of the temple? The temple is your own structure, which holds a record of all of the generations in your bloodline. And our culture teaches us to put a veil over it, a barrier on top of it, so we don't have to look and we don't have to deal with it. Yeshua says, and that's celebrated today, that veil must be rent in twain. And symbolically, they say the purple curtain in the church opened. But that's not in the temple. That's not what it is. It's the barrier between your own subconscious and your unconscious that you're pushing back and opening with each new level of skill that you develop in doing your work. And as you open that veil one more degree, then you get to see another whole layer of what needs to be processed through. Open another degree, you get to see a whole other layer. Come to a new level of vitality, and you get to see a whole other layer. And the courage to heal is, and stay with it, is huge and monumental. And so that's what we're here to support. That's the whole purpose for everything that we do, is to get people to the point, to get a group of people large enough to create critical mass, to make the understanding and the doing of forgiveness an established energy in the fabric of the human psyche. To get that energetic pattern, to get it to critical mass. You know, when Yeshua says a little leavening leavens the whole loaf, he's not talking about bread. To get it to critical mass so that it is established in the psyche of 7.5 billion people. When that energetic pattern takes place, then if 75 people go through a week of workshops, 75 people are going to complete and continue to do their work. And so that's what we've been working for the last 45 years, to build a platform, an energetic platform, so that everybody who chooses to entertain and start to look at their work can step up on that platform and, go and make it happen. And I think that that ties in with the parable of the people who went into the field to work. And there were people who went into the field to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then there were some who got there at 5, and the owner of the vineyard paid them both the same thing. And the people who went in at 8 in the morning said, hey, well, what's the deal? How come? And the owner says, I'm giving you exactly what I promised you, right? If I choose to be generous and give the person who started at 5 o'clock, even though you toiled from 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock, if somebody came in at 4:30 and I choose to pay them the same, what business is it of yours? Mm-hmm. And as each one becomes the icebreaker, each one becomes the one who cracks through the frozen dynamics in their own psyche, opens a little more, a little more, a little more, so that the next person who moves into that level of doing their work does it easy in an easier way, doesn't have the same struggles and the same traumas. There was some interesting research done with rats running a maze in Japan. This goes back, I don't remember the details of it, maybe 15 years ago. And these rats started the maze at a certain speed, and, they were pretty slow. By the time they completed the experiments, these rats were running the maze. New ones were running the maze pretty quickly. They stopped the experiment. It was stopped for about 10 years. And then they took the same strain of rats. Of course, none of those same rats are alive 10 years later, but they started that experiment in America. And the rats that they started with started the maze at the same place as the top rats had started 10 years earlier. It's an energetic dynamic. We're looking to establish in the psyche of humanity an understanding that we can face these things, we can forgive these things, we can literally take up our cross, process through those things, and incarnate as the active presence of love. That's the resurrection. And the average person in our culture today is dead by the age of 4. That is, their human lives are gone. When the stress is up and the chips are down, who do you know over the age of 4 that stands, as Yeshua did, as a space of love and connectedness? Who do you know? It's pretty rare. So human life is eradicated by the hostility and fear of the planet in most everyone by the age of 4. That's death. And to resurrect is to bring that back so that you can stand in the middle of that stress and strain, of that situation that, yesterday would have been so terrible, and you stand as the active presence of love. You are established in the earth. You are established as a human being, and our definition of a human being is hold a newborn child. And so if you establish yourself as a human being, when the stress is up and the chips are down, that mind of Christ is returned to earth. If we can get that established in enough people on the planet, in the psyche of the earth, then there'll come a point where 7.5 billion people will automatically start to do it. That's what we're working toward. Critical mass.
Michael?
Leavening. Yes.
Michael, it's Rex. How you doing?
Hey, Rex, welcome, sir. Go for it.
Hi, Dale. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I just had a comment I wanted to make regarding the part about understanding. I am teaching a class, The Laws of Living, on Wednesday evenings as well as in the prison. And I had my students, and I was teaching the class, and we were in a mode where the topic came up of punishment and reward, which is a lot of this suffering thing, I think, is related to that. And so I was kind of talking about that, and I know it can be a huge trigger for people because people think that, like, when you get down to the worksheet, you should feel better, rather than just having a shift of consciousness. They look for I'm going to feel better, and then they don't feel better, then they say it doesn't work. So that's just a real brief thing. But we were talking about that, And it opened up a conversation, a very deep conversation, which happens almost all the time, of interacting with my students. And one lady was sitting there, and she's very bright. She's a professor at a college. And she's just sitting there kind of looking a little baffled but smiling. So I said, "How are you doing?" She said, "Good." She said, I don't really understand. And normally, in a class setting, I'll say, well, give me more information as to what part you don't understand, or what would you, what are you, but in the moment, I just intuitively, I asked, because I just had that sense to ask it differently, I said, and is that okay? And she got a great big smile on her face and just beamed, from my perception, light out of her eyes. I mean, she just lit up. And I got a big smile, and she said, oh, yeah, it's perfectly okay. And I just said, okay, good, and I moved on. And what I saw and what I experienced intuitively was that she got her carbon-based mind out of the way, and she was getting a direct, it sounds a little bit like a download, a direct experience of Ruka inside her. And it's never about what I might say or do, other than as a teacher to resonate that truth inside the individual so that they have an experience of it. And that seemed to happen, and I got so excited, and I feel the energy even right now, and it's been pretty incredible. She called the next morning and said, wow, I don't know what happened, but I was altered the whole class. That was the most profound class I've been in. I was altered the whole class. I had this and this happen, but yet she really couldn't put her finger on what it was that was said or what it was that was done. And as far as a language and understanding, and that's why I thought it'd be good to interject that, is because it's never about understanding. It's about having an experience. And then, if important, understanding comes with the experience as far as my own, process, and I've observed that as well with others, but it may not. But it's our attachment to wanting to understand, to engage that carbon-based mind, that replicate mind, the interactive process with our past, that blocks our ability to hear the truth from the divine. So that is my input. I just wanted to share that with all of you.
And that's awesome, Rex. And, you've heard me say many times, kind of tongue-in-cheek, you got to be out of your mind, and it sounds like that's exactly what she did. And when Yeshua says, they want to worship him, and he says, you want somebody who comes in their own name, I'm not your guy. In fact, he says, you can deny me, but don't deny the one I'm here to connect you with. That's what she got, is the one that he came to connect every one of us with. And then the challenge is to live in that connection when the mind wants to come back in and go, oh, well, wait a minute, I have something exciting for you. Look, I have some intellectually stimulating information. When it's all about, he came to connect us with the one within us. And that's what I hear you describing. So that's awesome. That must have been a really sweet space. And my experience is when that happens, when one person gets that, then everybody in the room starts to be able to tap into it. It becomes established in the psyche of the group, and that's what I'm talking about. We want to get to the point where we can establish that in the psyche of the whole of humanity, and that's when there's going to be mass awakening and the whole thing shifts.
And that's why I wanted to share it as well, because I felt and still feel changed. And Dale, you talked about how when you were up with Dr. Tim and you were on your tour in the Midwest, that you came back and it was just, everything is just moving and grooving. And it was my words, but you said it differently. But it was as if you were describing some of the things that I've been having happen in my experience, is that watching things just unfold and having an experience in the prison the day before, and then Wednesday, and then with my clients, and seeing this and watching people wake up to their being, their human beingness, and then actually being able to witness it and have such a tangible experience that I can actually talk about to share it. They called the next morning, and it was, I also got that was the idea of making sure that I was paying attention. They called the next morning and said, oh, by the way, guess what happened? And I want to give you feedback. When you got up and started moving around, everything started changing, and when it really wasn't even about the words, it was about the energy, and then I didn't understand, and I didn't care, and she went through the whole thing, and explained it all, and it just reinforced the experience I had the night before. And absolutely, that energy in the entire group is just it just opens and opens and opens, and I'm seeing that more and more in the world that I'm blessed to be a part of.
And I really that's something that I always do. It's a question that I often ask. I'll say to them, is it okay that you don't understand? Because I call it the cosmic question mark. Because it's like when we allow, that's what the emptiness is, that's what the openness is, when we're not focused on the body, we're not focused on the stuff, the things, the information, the words on the page, but we can actually be open, and in the words of the Lakota, let the wind blow through us, and to be open in that experience, fluid, not a stagnant concept of who I think I am, but rather, in fact, that open realization that I am, that it's such a different way of living to be. I always say I seek to live my life mid-step. I don't always necessarily know where my foot's going to land. And in truth, I don't care, because it's done in presence, and that's what matters. If it's done in presence, in the words of John Kabat-Zinn, wherever you go, there you are, and I can't imagine living any other way at this point, because I lived the old way, and to be blunt, it sucked. I didn't like it. It's just horrible, and it's just you're constantly yo-yoing back and forth between this and that. But when you're able to actually be a walking prayer and live the process of forgiveness 24/7, doesn't mean you do it perfectly all the time, but when you're willing to be there, life, it's amazing, because the reflection you realize reflects whatever it is that you think is so. It'll give it to you, and it's beautiful to be that awake.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you, Michael, and Dr. Tim, and Jeanie, and Michelle, and the whole community. And happy celebration of life and joy and beingness while we share Easter. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Our time is just about up. We hold the space for an awesome Easter celebration, the true awakening of that mind of love in each and every one that's here, and we invite you to give the best gift you can possibly give to the world, and that is the best year yet of your eternal life. Contact Dale through his website, www.daleallenhoffman.com. If you're in Pahrump, Nevada, we'll be doing Healing Through Relationships tonight at the 9 Community Coalition. So come and join us at 7 o'clock. Give the world the best gift